I'm Rachel McGrath. I'm from Northamptonshire Community Foundation. I'm really delighted to be taking part in this emotions and feelings in the voluntary sector work and an exploration in research and practice. I'm not so much coming from a research or academic point of view, I'm coming from a practitioner's point of view, so I'm hoping this will really add value to you today. I'm delighted to be joined by Victoria Miles, DL, CEO of Northamptonshire Community Foundation, and Caroline Taylor, CEO from Essex Community Foundation. And my focus really today is that since COVID-19, the Community Foundation Network, for those of you who don't know, are a network of place-based givers. We're on the front line. We're responsible and probably the key funders of small voluntary community organisations. And since the end of March, when we originally went into lockdown, we have been in this pressure cooker situation to actually hit the ground running and deliver funds and get funds in and get funds out for local community groups doing the frontline work of providing a safety net, arguably in the absence of secured local authority services. My discussion today is with two key female leaders within our network, and to really explore, I think it's said in that case of who cares for the carers. In the voluntary sector, I think there's an element of often great work being done, but being undervalued and overlooked has been suggested this morning. And for those two female leaders really to kind of explore a bit of the gendered expectation placed upon them, particularly in a state of emergency response, where you're not only responsible for working with donors, but also ensuring money gets to the front line in good time to protect our communities. So no pressure, Caroline and Victoria, they've just come from the UKCF AGM. So I think they're probably seeing this as a bit of a timely kind of offloading moment as well. But I'm going to start with Victoria. Victoria, welcome and thank you for joining us. What do you feel the pressures that you have felt in your role as a philanthropy leader responding to this public health crisis? And within that, what are the additional challenges and stresses that you've experienced?
Oh, great question, Rachel. I mulled over this a lot, actually, as I'm sure Caroline has, and everybody else here will be thinking the same things, I suppose, that we all went into at the beginning of lockdown. I mean, the first thing for us was that never before had we tried and tested the business recovery plan in so short a space of time. And actually I wasn't fit for purpose. I've had to go back and rewrite it. It was a week whereby all of the team, all 9 of us, were given laptops. We worked really quickly to get everybody have mobile phones, etc., and just making sure that the team was sorted and could work comfortably from home at the same time as the volume of grant funding that we started to see come through, that our days were elongated into long 12-hour days, because normally we would work on a timetable of dishing out grants, but of course we couldn't do that. It was a rolling program. So just to make sure that the team knew what they were doing and how we could cope with that, coupled with the fact that I really felt at that time kind of incredibly lonely as a chief executive. Although I've got a great team around me, I felt that the board of trustees were just not present enough, and that to me felt like a massive risk in terms of us just having to get on with it, because we didn't have the opportunity to perhaps, or perhaps that was my fault, just converse with them to let them know what was happening and how we were doing it. And even though there was updates going back out to the board, I felt that I was having to nurture the team, make sure they were sorted, whilst at the same time my house suddenly became full of early 20-year-olds, somebody coming back from university, my middle boy being furloughed from his job, and just being absolutely enveloped with a considerable amount of change and working out of the back bedroom. So trying to keep everybody happy was the biggest thing, I think, and the longer days were really, really hard work. And I remember waking up on a Wednesday morning and thinking, oh my God, it's only Wednesday morning and I've got to do the walk from the bedroom to the other bedroom to sit at the laptop and just start again. But realizing and recognizing that what we were doing was vitally important work, because you suddenly realize that those voluntary sector organizations needed your support, needed your help, needed your team to be at the end of the phone to say, yes, you can have some funding, and to adapt in that space. So lots of learning from that. The biggest thing for me is keeping that momentum, keeping that nurturing of the team, but also your own sort of, your own health and well-being, and recognizing that if you're not looking after yourself, you can't look after anybody else as well. So that they were the key things for me, really. I don't know if that's helpful.
No, that is, thank you, Victoria, particularly talking about the areas of almost in a way taking on, again, a mother role outside of the home, as well as, within your staff team, making sure people felt nurtured, felt supported, but at the same time having to manage that on your own when the board were becoming remote. And that really important point about health and well-being, which I think is an area that's not explored often enough in the voluntary and community sector, where we're very key towards supporting other people's health and well-being, particularly in the last 6 months. But of course, if we're not looking after our own health and well-being, how are we being effective and supportive for the wide voluntary and community sector and the vulnerable residents and people that we serve in our communities? Caroline, welcome. Thank you for joining us, and I hope the AGM went well. How have you, as a philanthropy leader within Essex, responding to this public health crisis? What are the pressures you felt, and what are the additional challenges and stresses that you've had to deal with?
Well, thanks, Rachel, and hello to everyone. I think very much it feels that there have been very distinct phases actually since the end of March, and right at the beginning, the response within our community over that initial weekend before lockdown was announced really set a pace that the foundation had to respond to. And there was a very much a common purpose within my team of, it was a bit of a battlefield, and it was there was something that we could all get behind together, and some clarity about who was going to be doing what and how it was going to unfold, and there was a great spirit about it actually. I think what's been interesting for me is reflecting on myself and my personality in situations like that. I know that I'm good in a crisis, but I know that I'm a bit of a perfectionist and can have high standards. And so very much at the start, my chief constable, because I was participating in the local resilience forums, my chief constable said to me, in a crisis, Caroline, good enough is good enough. And it's just been a mantra I've been trying to hold on to with my team as well, to say, what we're doing is it's in the best spirits, and we're trying to serve our communities well. We're trying to serve our philanthropists. Philanthropists are demanding, they're needy, they have high expectations of you, they want quick responses, but they also want to work with you. So there have been, as a leader at my foundation, it's been managing lots of different personalities, lots of different expectations. You very much, I think now I feel we're in a very different, we've kind of gone over a curve and we're in a very different place. And I think keeping my team motivated when we're still very much working in different places, our response has slowed down, and it's changed. And it feels very difficult actually as a leader to keep my team happy and motivated and focused, as well as my managing the expectations of my trustees. And as Victoria says, it can feel very lonely. You're holding the anxiety of all of your team, and it's very challenging. So being able to talk about it with colleagues is really important. Having a board that can be supportive of you is very important. But I think definitely recognizing that we're in a very different period now for my team than we were 5-6 months ago, and therefore I need to respond differently to them and to the situation.
Thank you, Caroline. I thought some really, really good points there about being good enough in a crisis rather than being perfect and hit the ground running, and perhaps just accepting that mistakes are going to be made, but that's okay, because some of the priorities perhaps are, for example, getting the funding out there and making sure the community groups on the front line have access to those funds quickly. And about, as you say, managing expectations from a number of people and having to sort of juggle that from your board to donors to your staff. Adaptation during this time, and I just wanted to explore with you in Victoria now. There was obviously conversations there about offloading and having support networks. What support networks have you both found as sort of female philanthropy leaders during this time, and what gaps have there been? Where do you think the support networks need to be in the sector, Victoria?
Well, one of the best support networks has been mine and Caroline have got. I've had a WhatsApp group with another chief executive, and that's been really helpful because we met more frequently. We were always quite close anyway, but we met more frequently because of technology. So we were able to have Zoom on a Friday night with a glass of wine and have a good old chat, and that's been really, really helpful. So those support networks have been great. I do rely very much on sort of my friendship network outside of work. Family has been less so, I think, during this period, because I've felt that family have had their own issues and challenges. So it's been really lovely to talk to people who are in similar situations work-wise. I think that's been critical. So clearly, Rachel, you and I work well together. So we have worked tremendously well during this time to recognise the needs of the team. So that's been important. I think guilt has been a massive issue and challenge during this period. And something that Caroline said about philanthropists being quite needy, I have really worried about the fact that some of my fund holders I haven't been able to contact in the same way that I would normally do. So I don't sit behind a laptop all day. Usually I'm out and about a great deal of the time, so I'm visiting people, I'm dropping in for cups of tea, or they come into the office to do that. And you know, building philanthropy is building relationships, and people give to people. I had this enormous sense of guilt from some of my older donors as well, who were isolating, who I haven't been able to see. One chap who is partially deaf and can't accept a phone call. I haven't seen him since the beginning of lockdown, and I can write to him because he doesn't email. But all of that work, which is so vitally important when you're strengthening and building your philanthropic work, that's been really difficult. So being able to talk to colleagues who are like-minded, I've found huge strength in that, because I think we all faced really similar situations.
Caroline, what do you think in terms of your own support networks and where the gaps might lie?
I think, well, interestingly, I said a number of years ago, set up with some other chief executives of county-wide organisations in Essex. So, you know, as you mentioned earlier, a lot of the types of organisations that community foundations typically support are very local, you know, based in a village or a town. They're you know, a few postcodes, that's where they operate. But Essex is a very large county. It's got very complex top-tier local authority and district structure. And so a number of years ago, I set up a network for chief execs of county-wide organisations. And it does not seek to be representative of anything or anyone. It really just is a peer support group. And it's a way in which we as chief executives with similar experiences in a similar place can share. I mean, often it can be intelligence about what's going on in the environment, but equally it's about what's going on in our own organizations. And that we accelerated how often we met. So before COVID, it was quarterly. But during the pandemic, we moved it to weekly, and they were a fabulous resource because it was just a reminder of you know, the level of activity that was going on within the local communities, and you know, the real challenges that a lot of chief execs, I was slightly immune to this, but having the anxiety of having to furlough staff or not furlough staff, you know, obviously the reduction in income, the huge increases in demand. There's, you know, a number of children's counselling organisations and domestic abuse organisations who were seeing massive increases in numbers of referrals and demand on their services whilst coping with everything else. And just having those connections with others meant that there was a real you know, it was the sharing of how you're feeling about stuff, and often some tangible things would come out of it, but I think it was recognizing that it was okay if nothing came as a result of those conversations, other than just the sharing of, you know, this is a really crappy day, I don't know who to furlough, I don't know what to do, you know, who else is doing what, and it just to know that you weren't alone was a real comfort, and that's been a network that I've leaned on quite a lot.
So to wind down before we go to Q&A to the wider audience, I just want to have one final question for you both to consider, and thank you both Victoria and Caroline for that highlighting of the importance of peer support networks whilst you're crisis managing, as well as that shared experience you were talking about, Caroline, which really makes a difference in terms of people's understanding and heightened empathy of what you're going through and the need to offload. As local philanthropy leaders, how do you feel right now? How are you?
No way to begin. I'm kind of it's a real double edge actually. At any given moment I can, and I've said this to Victoria in the past actually, the highs are really high and the lows are desperately low. And I think what has been exaggerated for me in a crisis like this is just the disparity between those two, and trying to find some even good enough is good enough middle ground is what I seek to achieve. But I feel burnt out. I'm concerned about my team. I'm concerned about keeping them motivated, them losing their work identity. That's a phrase I heard the other day that I thought was really interesting. How, because we're not in the same room, we don't have the same levels of input and creativity and discussion that we normally have, that some people I've noticed in my team are not quite as prevalent as they used to be. And so the dynamics of the team is changing in this environment, and perhaps irrevocably. I don't know. So I just feel a whole mix of emotions, to be honest.
Thank you. A whole mix of emotions, highlighting a number of issues a number of organisations are contending with. Victoria, over to you before we go over to the chair, Julian, to take some Q&A.
Well, I think Caroline's right. I think that somebody described it to me as Corona coaster. And some days I'm really up for it and I'm there and I'm kind of on it, and then other days I wake up and I think, I can't do this today, I can't be the positive person, and trying really hard not to overthink it, because I think you can't, you know, somebody said to me early on, we're not trying to work from home, we're trying to work from home in a crisis. And that's so true, isn't it? Because it's just so weird and not normal. And you can't, I don't know about anybody else, but I can't read what others in the team are thinking on a screen. So there's that sort of lack of, you know, the screen is a barrier to recognizing and identifying others' emotional intelligence. And I'm quite good at that as a manager, in terms of recognizing that people aren't necessarily having a good day as well. So I worry about that. I do worry, and I'll pick up the phone and I'll ask them if they're okay if I'm not entirely sure. So, but I just think it's all part and parcel of this crisis that we're in. But some days I'm really flat, and other days I've got great ideas and I pick up and I run with it. But I do find the lack of creativity through the work that we're doing, because it's so flat on screen, that, you know, I mean, Rachel and I are actually in the office today for the first time in weeks and weeks, and it's just been nice to have a socially distanced chat. You know, she's just down the corridor from me, but and another member of staff as well, because you just lack that when you're sat in your office bedroom or wherever you're working, or your dining room. It's just very flat and quite difficult to get your head around, even though, you know, we've been doing this for quite some time now. I'm so looking forward to being able to go to an event again.